today, and really excited to have you here. So thank you so much for coming all the way from Montreal to come and join us. And I know I've been a massive fan of yours for, I think I've been connected with you for quite a few years on LinkedIn, and been following your more about your kind of weekend exploits, like going out on your kind of go-karts and doing all your crazy adrenaline stuff. And I think you were somebody that really inspired me, that you're very much about trying to find that work balance, you know, with creating this amazing kind of like career that you've set out for yourself, but also that you're very, very keen to, you know, set some really high standards of making sure that you have a really good kind of like, hopefully, mental health awareness, and that you're really, you know, trying to kind of like look after yourself as well. And I would love to hear from. Oh, I'm just gonna. Oh, Ben, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right. I put everybody else on mute. So let me just say, is there anybody joining the room? Please, can you just put your microphone on mute? You're welcome to be on camera, and I'm just going to open up the room to Ben now. He'll give a little introduction about himself.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invite. I'm excited I'm excited for your questions today. I think the intro for me and my background, in high school, I fell in love with math. I would spend hours on the weekend listening to Cat Stevens, just like people might sketch and draw. I'd spend many hours on the weekend in high school doing math. Because when I was introduced to calculus, I fell in love with it. And so I was planning on going to school and studying math, but when I realized how little money they made, I I channeled that into chemical engineering, because my dad's a doctor, my brother's a doctor. I think there are common expectations that you will become a doctor if you're in a doctor family. So I studied that. A funny story for the audience that is maybe a little different. When I went to college, I lived in the woods, in the snow, and it made national news in the US. The coldest it got when I was sleeping outside was 15 below zero, because I had a little thermometer on my backpack, so there would be frost on my pillow sometimes. And I was taking 19 credit hours of engineering. And so that led to radio talk shows, newspaper articles. I was on TV twice, and I ended up getting 2 sponsorships from it. And this actually allowed me, this is what led to me learning how to program, because it was before social media. I learned HTML, CSS in 2002, and I was trying to point the newspaper articles to my blog so they could follow me and I could engage with an audience. And then that led to PHP. I started an e-commerce store selling rock climbing gear, and that introduced me to just everything, a LAMP stack, MySQL, Linux. And then I was introduced to computer vision and high performance computing. So some people think I'm an AI nerd, but really I'm a high performance computing nerd. I like big computers to cry. It makes me happy. Then I went, as a chemical engineer, I went and worked at Intel and Micron for 5 years. So everything related to data and applied semiconductor, from process control to fault detection to yield analysis, metrology, which is their computer vision, anything related to data. I feel like I had experience with that. And then I had an opportunity to go work at a hedge fund. It was a high performance computing hedge fund. We built out a 600 GPU cluster in the office. This was 2012, and we were trading on the news. So it was NLP focused. So think of going into an earnings announcement on Netflix. Can we analyze everything that's been said about the company up into that moment and make a decision on the trade? So this was interesting, because I think when people start out their careers, they often make the mistake of chasing money, because that's their evidence of progress. If I can have a bigger title, if I can have more money, that means I am winning at the game of life or the game of a career. And the hedge fund was an important lesson for me to realize that's you might think you're winning, but you're actually losing. So I worked at a hedge fund. I would leave in the dark, drive my AMG Mercedes. I'd come home in the dark, and I was becoming a bigger asshole. And I didn't and my wonderful wife was noticing, and so she was encouraging me to quit. The month I quit was bullet bike bonus month for the quants. So every quant was getting a bullet bike as a bonus. So Ducatis, BMWs, and you can
Wow.
imagine what my wonderful spouse thought of that. So fortunately, I was able to quit, and then I joined Higher View. Higher View is a Sequoia capital company, so I was their founding data scientist, became their chief data scientist, hired a team of PhD physicists, and we went after building machine learning algorithms that would predict the interview outcome of someone applying to get a job. So Fortune 100 interviews, someone interviewing for a top bank or for a top airline, based on everything they said during the interview, we'd predict how well they scored compared to past performance,
Hmm.
past applicants, which is a very interesting ethics discussion
Mm.
because you have bias.
Yeah.
There's unconscious bias in the data, racism, ageism, sexism that can come through. And so my team, we helped come up with ways to remove that. So we could take a data set that had bias and build a model in production that removed the bias. And we could talk about how we do that. I did that for 4 years. And then I got the itch to go do a startup. And I think for people that do startups, I would encourage people listening. I hope some of you will go and do startups because it's kind of the ultimate hero's journey. You are fighting the market. So I got the itch to do a startup, co-founded a deep learning startup, platform startup in 2018, later sold that to DataRobot 3 years later. And then I worked in DataRobot in marketing as their chief evangelist for 2 years. And I resigned in August. And then I've joined a new company, and Lucy knows who that new company is, but I can't announce it until next week because
Hmm.
it's under embargo.
Yeah.
So that was a longer intro than I meant.
Wow, the long and short of it, my God, that's like crazy. And I love the fact, like, Eden Smith, like we're a startup, we've been like trading for six years now. I joined 5 years ago. So yeah, I've done that journey, and it's really different to corporate life, right? Where there's no process, and it's kind of fun to go along the journey with it, and you just get frustrated at different things. Um, but what I love about your journey is that you just seem to have this real fighting spirit and resilience about it. And so I'm going to dive in with a couple of questions. I had one from one of the students already. So he has asked, if you had to start your career again and relearn everything from scratch, what would you do differently or focus on to get where you are today? And that's from one of my students, Braden, who's in the room.
That's a great question. One of the issues with starting a career is it really is a random walk of chaos for a lot of people. So why did I choose chemical engineering? Well, I liked math and I had the bias coming from my family to go to medical school. But later in my career, I was introduced to marketing, go to market and selling, and I really love that part. I love networking, I love storytelling. And so
Mhm.
there's a few themes that I tell students that your first job that you get, you're not qualified to know if it's a good job because you have no reference of comparison. So I having several jobs is helpful. If I could go back in time, if I want to be a little cheeky,
Go
uh,
ahead. Go ahead.
okay, okay. If I could go back in time and really manipulate the environment of because humans were emotional creatures. So if I could go back in time, I would have made a goal in high school to go to Stanford, no matter what. And I would have gone to Stanford and I would have studied computer science. And the first semester I would have had no friends. Can you still hear me, Lucy? I
Yep, I can
Okay,
hear
great.
you. Yep.
Yeah, so the first semester I would have no friends, no social life. I'd work 100 hours a week and I would try to be top of my class in every class, not because I'm smart, but because I'm working harder than everyone else. I'm trying to be the teacher's pet. And then after one successful semester at Stanford, I would drop out and I would go to the local VCs in the Bay Area and I would say, I'm not challenged at school. Or I'd tell I'd kind of set that perception that I want to go and raise capital for my AI startup.
Wow.
Because the bias that exists in the Bay Area, it's a little different now with the chaos of the current tech markets,
Mm.
but I heard a story from a Stanford professor that they were regular people, VCs would approach them on a regular basis asking if they have any exceptional students that are doing anything interesting because they have a $200 million fund that they're trying to liquidate. And the funny thing about that, it's not about them trying to liquidate a $200 million fund. It's that they have a second $200 million fund coming online in a few months. So the desperation is there and the bias at Stanford is real.
Mm.
And at HireVue, my team, we analyzed 400,000 resumes, and Stanford was number one for the, if you had an email address at Stanford, that you getting a job was higher than any other academic institution. And you
Wow.
could, and this is interesting because you could
Mm.
say, is it because they're truly competent or is it because there's a bias?
Mm.
And that's a little harder to unpack.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good answer, and I really love that you go there for the term, you'd be amazing, and then you like drop out and then go and do your own thing. And I wouldn't expect anything less than you. That's
Well,
awesome. Were you just about to say something? Sorry.
well, I was going to say I love startups because you wear so many hats. So
Yeah.
for anyone listening, if you go to a startup, now you're wearing a product hat. Now you're wearing a marketing hat. Now you're wearing a sales hat or a customer success hat. And you don't know how to do what you're being tasked to do. And so it's the ultimate high-paced, high-stress environment to learn.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I can definitely concur with that. You kind of have to juggle many things, right? And there's lots of things that keep you up at night that might be different to if you worked in a corporate, right? There's a lot of different kind of stresses. And I love that fact that kind of leads me on to like being disruptive, right? So I was just listening to a podcast with a kind of fellow, like a chief data officer here in the UK, and he was saying that in his journey of being a chief data officer for the government organization was that what he learned was it was good to be disruptive, but not to cause disruption in the business. And there's a real kind of like thin line with that, like how do you balance that, because you want to make an impact, but you need to be responsible with it and not cause chaos like in your wake, right? And I think a lot of people in these positions as well is that because the job descriptions are not aligned, because we're still in our fledgling kind of stages in this fourth industrial revolution, right? And so those job descriptions, I think, are fairly unfair. It's a bit like going into the lion's den. You don't really know. They think they want a chief data officer or a CXO, but what do they really mean? What do they really want? And it seems to be here, definitely in the UK, that a lot of people at that senior suite level are leaving almost as quickly as they came because it's not transparent. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it's complicated. I like one of the things I think about when I think of the chief data officer or the chief innovation officer is the nice thing about that is it's a back to pat or a face to slap, meaning there's a single person that executives can interact with, which is much better than interacting directly with data scientists. Because data scientists they tend to lack business acumen and they can struggle with communication, they struggle with urgency. And so bringing in an executive like that, if they have urgency to defend their orgs and deliver value, that's a good thing. One of the things you mentioned is they have very high turnover in the industry.
Mhm.
I heard someone say the average tenure of a chief data officer is 14 months. There could be numbers that are lower than that. And I think one of the things you're dealing with is I heard someone say you have change management antibodies. So if
Mm.
you come into an organization, if you want to apply AI to multiple departments, there's a lot of different reasons why that would fail. You may not have buy-in from the org, you may not have buy-in from the executives. You really want a top-down mandate from the CEO for those types of programs to really be successful. But you
Yeah.
also need a chief data officer that can defend their org.
Yeah, and one of my thoughts, because we did a workshop a couple of weeks ago. I went up to Salford University, and we talked about the juxtaposition of the business and data science, and how I'm really trying to coach the students to really kind of look at the business with a business lens. And that was also one of my learnings from sort of like CDO exchanges, is that You know, the ones that have been successful are looking at the business as a business leader first, and then second as a data leader, because I've had struggles when it's been the other way around. You need to speak the language of the business in order to get the buy-in, because when we talked about that we need to get the company to have the buy-in to move everyone along, to win those hearts and minds, right? Because you don't want to leave everyone behind, and you don't want to leave pockets of people. You want to kind of bring everyone into this journey, because it is exciting, but it's also can be scary, right? And I think one of the things that I hear a lot is about, automation and AI and robotics, and people are like, we're gonna lose our jobs, and where's the place for us? But I think it's all about managing that and being skillful at narrating that story. So I'm trying to teach, I guess, in my position as a mentor, as a faculty, lecturers, that I really want to impact the students, that they feel like they can tell those stories and be compelling about them, but bring everyone behind, with them. And when we're talking about, robots, I was just reading about, I just watched that video of Sophia, and the first robot to get full citizenship in Saudi Arabia. She even owns a credit card, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't even have a credit card. This is crazy. And I just wondered what you thought. I was reading about Roy Kurzweil, and he was saying in 2045, robots are going to become as smart as humans. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a really fun discussion. I know there are multiple startups that are funded right now to chase what's called the singularity. So the singularity is if we reach that point in technology where we've created an AI that is just as complicated or just as intelligent as a human, the reason they call it a singularity is because we don't know what happens after that. So for example, if I have an AI that can publish 10,000 papers, science or nature quality tomorrow, it's discovering so much new information about the universe so quickly that humans can't even keep up with it. And so if that happens and you get a runaway event, Hollywood has talked about having a breakout or losing control. And so there are singularity startups that want to create it and understand it. But the funny thing about this singularity discussion is, how would you know if you had, besides the publication example, what is a test where you would know if something was on par with a human? And so the Turing test has been very popular in the past, where you have a chatbot and you have humans that are trying to decide if it's human or not. And that we've quickly realized that is insufficient. I could have an AI that can pass the Turing test with 100% accuracy. That does not mean anything. It does
Mm.
not mean it's conscious. And so they've tried to come up with replacements. I think one of the suggested replacements is a really smart AI should be able to watch a show, Seinfeld or some other movie, and it should be able to comprehend everything that's happening in the movie. And in my opinion, that is also insufficient. And one of the things I'm a really big fan of is working backwards. You can work backwards on giving a presentation, sales, building a product. And so if we just work backwards on the singularity, we can actually answer some of these questions. So an example of working backwards is, I have an announcement to make. I created the singularity, but don't worry, it's been randomly initialized, which means it's stupid. It's randomly initialized, but it will become the singularity. And the only input going into this thing is a camera. That's it. It's off the internet, just has an RGB camera going into it. And it's in my kitchen. So every morning I come down, I cook eggs, I get the kids ready for school. And so we can actually begin to answer what are some of the things this system will be able to do better than I can?
Mm.
Well, it'll have perfect memory recall. It'll have perfect attention to detail. And it's interesting because it would naturally have novelty seeking behaviors. So me taking the kids to school every morning eventually becomes quite boring. It's very predictable. It might even be able to predict how many eggs I'm going to crack, or whether or not I will get bacon today, better than I could, or better than someone else could. But when my mother-in-law comes over for the first time, this is the most exciting thing. it has not seen my mother-in-law before. And so it will think about this, it will study this. It the concept of dreaming or understanding topics would make a lot of sense with a system like this. But I'm talking too long on this answer, but the interesting thing with the singularity is I like to think of it as a parlor trick. Think of a magician.
Mm.
So with funding and time, I could probably pretty easily convince my parents this year that I've created the singularity in a way that they are quite concerned. They don't know what this means. And so maybe we would say 5 or 10% of society could be fooled that a singularity has been created. And I would argue that's already happened. You look at that Google engineer that was fired because he believed that Google had created something living,
Mm.
which is a little silly. Um, that fraction will increase over time. I would argue that we will never reach 100% consensus.
Mm.
We might reach something where 90% of society believes, and so we will have debates on AI rights and am I allowed to randomly initialize an AI system that has experience, or is that somehow, does it have some rights where I should not be allowed to do that? But ultimately, it makes us ask questions about ourselves. I think, how do you define consciousness? Do you actually have free will, or are we all sensory response? It brings up some very provocative questions.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben, for that. I want to open up the room for if anyone is not feeling too shy to take the microphone off and jump in and ask some questions directly to Ben. Is that dreaded silence?
You can
Oh, here we
chat
go.
them too. I can see the chat.
Here we go. Mastea, go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hello. I want to thank you for taking the time to answer our questions. My question is about how do you get started on successful AI career? And another question is about, in your experience, what challenges do successful AI initiatives encounter most frequently? And thank you again for taking time to answer our question.
I didn't quite hear that, Mastanea. The second part, the first part we actually, and I think at the beginning of the conversation, so you might want to watch that back where Ben talked about his career and how he got started. But the second part, we didn't hear the question. Can you just repeat that, please?
Yes, of course. About the challenges that the successful AI encounter most frequently, I mean, in your experience.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, what are the challenges that AI encounters?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so there's some big challenges today where, well, ethics is a big one. A lot of people talk about AI ethics, and I think at a very high level, I would split ethics into two camps, reactive and proactive. So anytime you read something very negative in the news where AI has created a sexist resume model or something like that, or something else, I would argue for most of those cases that I'm aware of, they were reactive. They're saying, oops, no one proactively had a conversation about how could this break or how could things be bad. And so AI ethics is something that continues to be discussed and evolved. And the other thing that's complicated is ethics. For some things, there are not global standards in ethics. And so an example I will give is in the US, it is considered unethical. It is illegal for me to use AI to do a lie detection test on a candidate who is being interviewed for a job, unless that job is the CIA, FBI, or some government agency.
Okay.
They can get exceptions. In Latin America, ethically, that would be fine. Ethically, those societies would welcome that. Challenges that AI has today, it doesn't. We still need lots of observations to build successful models. I would really like. Here's an AI challenge that I would be very impressed by. Build an AI system that can learn to speak English through experience, not studying 10,000 hours of audio, but just literally build an AI system that you talk to every day for a year and demonstrate to me that it can learn to speak English like a child. That would be, I would argue today, there are not if you download open source and start playing with different AI systems, there is not a path to do that today. So that is a very significant challenge to
Wow.
build a system like that.
That's the next startup, right? Then
That would be a great startup.
you heard it here, students. That's the one. But
Well,
you need to finish your masters. You can't leave the course, right?
there is a point that all of these startups are coming to. So you have a lot of these platform providers that make it easier to build AI systems. And one of the issues they struggle with is who is the audience and how difficult is it to learn the software? And when you think about themes like time to value and adapting software to meet the needs of the audience, eventually we reach this point, and I call that point Jarvis for everyone. So whether that happens in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, there will be an AI company which feels like Jarvis for everyone. So the Jarvis, the robot from Iron Man, I can imagine a scenario where there's an executive in their office and they begin to have a conversation. And that conversation has real-time visual feedback coming from the TV because it needs to convince the human that it is following them, that it's understanding their request. And a system like that is very doable. It's very straightforward to build. And it doesn't mean it's conscious. It doesn't mean it's the singular. It doesn't mean it's on par with you, but that system becomes very, very helpful because now you're working at the speed of thought.
Yeah.
The fun thing to think about with a system like that is I imagine a scenario in the future where I'm drinking a glass of wine, I'm watching the sunset, or my kids have gone to bed, and now I'm having a brief conversation with my home, and I'm tasking it for different projects to accomplish while I sleep. And the fun thing with this thought is when I go to sleep and wake up, there will be scenarios where I tasked it to do something and there was a problem with that request. I asked it to go build this particular model or deliver this report, and AI has run into an issue, and it's not the AI's fault, it's my fault. I gave it an incomplete task. And if I want to personify it a little bit, when I wake up in the morning, it doesn't want to disappoint me. And so at night, it has tried second, third, fourth, fifth best alternatives. In the morning when I'm having a conversation, cooking eggs and drinking a coffee, AI is reviewing the success where it was blocked. And so me as human, my role is to unblock it. My role is to literally get involved in the problems that actually are hard.
Right, exactly. Because if you'd given yourself that task to do, right, then you might have encountered those problems yourself, and so the robot is going through the same process. Is that what you're saying? Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, because I could have done those same tasks last night, but I would argue that would have been a waste of
Your time.
One of the sad realities for most people in society. They are overqualified for the work they're going to do tomorrow. Like drastically overqualified. My first job out of school, working in Intel and Micron, within a few weeks I realized that high school me could do this. But high school me is not responsible enough to reboot a $10 million machine.
Yeah.
They like having master's, PhD level engineers to do that.
Exactly. Okay, and then I have another question from one of my external clients, and she had asked, what do you see as the key trends for AI in engineering?
One of the key trends we see is, the image I'd like to share is, imagine an hourglass turned on its side. So in the middle, you have AutoML, you have automated machine learning building capabilities. And then on the input, on the flare going in, you have data types and data sources. And so data types might be structured data, it could be text, images, audio, periodic time series. There's a lot of different data types that can be supported. And the way that they're supported, I heard someone say that unstructured data is data that's waiting to be structured. And everything can be structured. So if you give me an image, I can put it through deep learning and structure it. Video, audio, I can always structure it, because for it to go into the core machine learning center, it must be structured. It must be machine ready. But then on the outside, there's a lot of different things that can do. That can be deployed into an application. It can generate reporting for a meeting. Can I make some execs meeting ready? There, or it can begin to interact with the business or the subject matter experts. And so I think what you'll see is expansion in those domains. So they will enable AI to connect to more sources to support more data types. Time to value will be faster. And I think time to value is interesting because it's normally defined by a specific audience. So time to value for the IT engineers, or time to value for the business, all of that will be accelerated and be faster. There are some themes that aren't often discussed in AI, and so those are, I feel like we don't pay enough attention to AI-assisted search, AI-assisted topic discovery, and intelligent design is something that is coming up more in the industrial space. And I can answer questions on any of those.
Okay, all right. And so talking about kind of like jobs in AI, there was something that came out, a report last year about, you know, kind of future jobs in, you know, in data. And there was one, I can't remember the name, but I think it sounded really good. And it was like looking after the robots. It was like a robot kind of like, you know, kind of zookeeper kind of, and I was like, God, that's my job. I'd love to do that. And I just wondered if you have you kind of got any thoughts about, like, you know, what kind of jobs in AI do you think there'll be in the future? Any kind of like interesting job titles and things? You know, like we've had like really crazy ones like the data whisperer, the data evangelist, you know, the data cowboy, you know, all those kind of like stuff, the data wrangler, like what, you know, and some of them are kind of stuff and nonsense, if I can be very British about it. But, you know, because really you just want people that can do the job and communicate well, right, and tell the story. But what are your thoughts about that?
I would encourage people to try to direct themselves towards value. And so you have all these different data science job titles, and I think there's a lot of value if you can align your job. And so pick any data science job, pick a title that you can land into: data engineer, data scientist, evangelist. And if you land into that job, you need to align the work you do to defensible value, because one of the things that shows up with a recession, if you don't have defensible value, people get cut, they get laid off. Large data science teams are cut because they often are unable to get defense on the value that they provide. The other thing to think about too is there's a competency build out that I would encourage everyone to do, because it will make you, if you try to build a competency skill set to become a CEO, you don't have to become a CEO. But if I understand marketing and sales and product, and if you like innovation, this is the example I'm trying to get to. Let's decide, for people that are listening, they say, I don't know if I want to be a CEO. I don't know if I want to do all this other stuff. I just want to be a really, really smart AI researcher. I want to build AI algorithms or methods or new things that are very impressive to that community, and they're things that don't exist. Okay, there's a lot of problems with researchers. Researchers are academic. They lack urgency, and they waste time and resources. And they often don't have defensible jobs. They're the first on the chopping block. If you can build out more of that, the breadth skill set to go across the business, you can add process to innovation. So let's say we come up with a really good idea. We're whiteboarding, we're writing up all these smart AI things on the board, and we have a great idea. That is fantastic. We can go build this out for a few months. Or I can ask, can we get user validation, product market valid, can we get user validation, marketing validation, and sales validation? Before we even build this, can I go to the marketing teams and ask, do you think we can run a webinar or a joint marketing project around this innovation, assuming it exists, and drive leads? Yes or no? I can go to the product team and ask, do you think users will use this innovation? Can we test with a customer advisory board with some UX mockups? And then I can also go to sales, and sales validation is interesting because normally product wants credit for everything. Product wants to say, we have 200 features and that's why they bought the product. But for sales validation, I would go to the president's club, so the top sellers in the company, and I would meet with them and I would say, if this innovation existed, would this end up in a top 3 close reason for your biggest strategic accounts? Yes or no? And hopefully what you can see what I just did is I found a reason to fail and I did it very quickly.
Mm.
So if I can fail on a smart idea that week and not waste building it for, I'm actually less
months.
concerned whether or not I can build it.
Yeah.
I'm much more concerned whether or not I should build it.
Very good point there. And I think, I think that's really interesting, and definitely something that we're trying to, like, definitely impart to the students is about, finding your place, but also looking through the lens of the business and seeing what value can you add, how can you give time back to people? How can you make people's lives easier, by doing your job? What impact can you have? And how can you kind of make yourself accountable for that? And I think that's really interesting. You touched on the thing about value as well. And I just had a conversation with somebody earlier about the difference with value and benefit. And they're two different things that are banded around data. And people will say, that the data, the value is, the kind of like the ROI at the end of it. But actually, that's actually in one other conversation I've had, they're saying that's the benefit, the value is the tangible, is the fiscal value of that data, which makes it intangible. But the benefit is, astronomical in that division. And I just wondered, do you have those kind of conversations? Do you kind of hit your head against any walls in business? Because, I'm sure you must surround yourself with really smart people. And I just wonder, that kind of literacy of, are we all on the same page? Do you kind of have to start from ground zero to make sure that everyone's aligned, make sure that you don't get that miscommunication?
Yeah, you have to understand not everyone has to have the business acumen. I've worked with people before. When I was at HireView, every member of my team had a PhD in physics, and most of them were not customer facing. They could not be, because we actually had feedback from customer success reps. They did not want members of my team on customer calls.
Yeah.
And it's not because they were stupid. It's because when a customer would ask a stupid question, they would have an audible sigh of annoyance, which is really bad if a customer is asking a stupid question.
Yeah.
Lucy, listening to you, there is a test that I just thought of that anyone who's listening can test themselves to understand if they fall prey to this value issue. So the challenge I give to the audience is your first week of your new job. Would you rather build a machine learning model for a particular process that is sophisticated enough that it would impress other people on this call, your peers? Or would you rather ship a Bayesian model that makes money sooner, more reliable for the business? And most data scientists actually skew to the first one. They want to impress their peers. They want to use the full technical depth that they feel like they have, and they're doing that selfishly over the needs of the business. So the needs of the business would be ship the most value you can as fast as you can do it. You can always change it. You can always improve it. But if you're delaying, today you have no AI system on this process, so you get no value. If I deliver a Bayesian model quickly, I'm going to get 80% of the value. And it may not be the most impressive model.
Okay, got you. I thought you were going to say there was a test to see if I'd done the stupid question. I was going to die like silently. But I'm just joking. Hopefully you don't think that. So I have a question from the audience as well. So the question is data science a dying profession? What is the future of data science? There's quite a lot of questions here. What will be its state in the next decade? And there's another one. If it's dying, how should we adapt? Have you got the gist of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think with software, some junior data scientists might feel like it's starting to nip at their heels or potentially eating them in the market, because
no code.
Why would I hire a junior data scientist when I can have a business analyst use a machine learning platform to build models today? I think that will be true for junior talent. It will become much more difficult for junior talent to get their foot in the door, but for senior and principal level talent, there are enough AI problems that these platforms don't support that you have work to do. I think there will always be jobs for senior AI machine learning researchers. I don't think these platform companies will do all of it, but
Take over
maybe
the market.
eventually, yeah, but maybe eventually they will. And I would not see that as a bad thing. Um, for Imagine if Jarvis for everyone was working really well, what would you be doing? And I think for people on this call, they could be very effective. They could be doing things that are very profound within a business, within data, but they don't need to be hand coding a machine learning model. The other thing too that I've learned in my experience is there's a lot of bias that comes into how we do things. So if we had someone here that was walking us through why they built this particular model for this particular data set, I think it'd be pretty quickly to realize that they have limited experience. So why are you choosing this model? Why are you choosing this loss function? Why are you taking this approach? It is limited to their experience, and all the more reason to not rely on your experience, all the more reason to rely on pooled experience through many, many thousands or tens of thousands of successful AI projects that find the right model for you. And I really fought that initially because my team would build stuff, I would build stuff, I know how to build stuff. And I realize now that there's so many things in AI machine learning that you don't have the time to know. And you don't run into it. You don't stub your toe on it. So why would you know it?
Right, that's a really good point. Yeah, so we started talking about, because obviously these, students are kind of at the beginning, they're at the kind of starting blocks of their career, and so maybe they're the ones in most sort of jeopardy of this kind of recession as well. So what we try to do with the nurture program is give them, if they come in through the nurture program, they get 3 months experience working with our clients, doing a machine learning project, so that when this informs their dissertation, so that when they graduate, they've got some experience. But we really do talk about their GitHub and making sure they're putting their projects onto GitHub and spending a lot of time with these passion projects and, being out in the world, right? And you kind of, for me, I come from I'm the most non-technical person you're ever going to meet, but, I love storytelling, right? So I kind of feel like this is my place to be. But for the students, you want to be in a place where you've got things that you can talk about. So you can talk about, why do people get hired, junior data scientists? And, my clients are always saying, well, they want to see curiosity. They want to see this kind of, real joie de vivre to live and to kind of be engaged in the marketplace, not be, in a lofty tower somewhere. They want to be kind of like in the nuts and bolts of it all. And I think, if there was any other kind of key tips for you to kind of impart to them, just mindful of the time as well, other things that they could get involved in, or things that might help them in, like, maybe when they're doing interviews, Ben, like, I don't know what kind of, characteristics you look for when you're hiring people.
Yeah, and I think you hit on it. So I gave a keynote talk 4 or 5 years ago in San Diego, and I was talking about this. And I told the audience that if you're normal, I would rather make my team suffer than hire you. If you're curious, then you might interview a handful of places, and eventually you'll land somewhere. There's an opportunity. If you're passionate, you've triggered my fear of missing out on you. I'm now concerned that I won't be able to move quickly enough or give you a compelling offer. And then if you're obsessed, I probably can't hire you. I can only hire you if your obsession aligns with my resources. And for talking to a lot of data science managers, they really hire based on passion. And the reason they do that is AI and machine learning is moving so quickly. I would like to say that everyone is not qualified for your job a year from now. And so if you aren't passionate, if you're not being pulled in this space, and if you demand that I need to spoon feed you or I need to point you to resources to keep up, then that's an emotional drain on me. That's a distraction, and I don't want that. I want someone that brings energy to my team. I want someone that tells me, did you see this? Are you aware of this? Or look what I did this weekend. So one of the common things people will do is they'll ask to see a portfolio, GitHub, or passion projects to gauge someone's interest. Um, uh, so something that's interesting about the interview process, and I apologize if I'm kind of forcing this in, but it is related. So when so there's kind of this interesting study in the interview process that happened a couple months ago. So when I resigned, my resignation post on LinkedIn went viral in the US, and that led to 110 interviews in 24 hours. And so I spent 2 months going through this process. And so it's pretty interesting understanding the interview process, getting jobs, not getting jobs, and how that plays out. And really one of the key things that shows up there is the power of storytelling. And I think for some of the people listening, they will realize too late in their careers, like I did, that network and storytelling are everything. But it's something that is not really appreciated when we're going to school and going through programs, because we don't really think about network. We don't really think about the power of storytelling and how it might help us get a job, help us recruit, help us raise money, help us sell software.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'm sure, like, did I read this right though? But when you did your YouTube interview, you put your story on YouTube, and then you didn't have. Did I read that right, or was that just nonsense? That you didn't have to do an actual interview; people just watched your video. Did I get that wrong?
No, you're right. So
Okay.
when I had 110 interviews scheduled, my calendar was slammed for the next week and a half. And I was doing interviews from 5 in the morning until 7 at night with no bathroom breaks. And after doing 31 of those, I realized mentally this is not what I need right now. And so I recorded my interview, which is 14 minutes, and I canceled. The following week, I had 80 interviews, and I canceled all of them. And I sent them my recorded interview, which I think I would recommend to a lot of people.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw it. I watched it. Yeah, it was good.
Well, if you practice your self pitch or your interview, I think there's a few things you can record it when you're sharp, not when you're completely fatigued.
Yeah.
And you can re-record it. You can practice your pitch. And so I found that helpful. But also I realized I was repeating myself with these interviews, and I didn't like that.
And did you find that people were coming to you like for the interviews, or I don't like to ask, but did you actively go out and search for jobs, or did they just come to you? I like to think they just came to you, Ben.
It was both. So
Okay.
I was actively leaning into Snowflake and Intel and Meta to try to understand what those looked like. And then for the others, a lot of them were inbound. Most of them were inbound.
Yeah. And then I think that's the power of your brand, right? And your reach. So when you post, I was talking to the students, and we've done workshops about brand and marketing, how important it is to start that network, like now. And we really, talk about that a lot. And I think, definitely in your post, you'll have hundreds of comments, right? And I'm always like, wow, he's got such big reach, this guy. He's just like everywhere. It's like this octopus. And I love it. But I think people just see you also as a friend, like you're very human. And I think, from my side, from across the pond, you definitely have this personality that people just want to have a beer with you or have a cup of coffee with you. You're like this likable rogue, right? This disruptor that's, is that fair to say?
Well, I appreciate that. That's kind of you to say. I think one of the things I'm a big fan of is vulnerability. And one of the things that changed with me over the last couple of years is I think I joked when I worked at the hedge fund that I was becoming a bigger asshole. And maybe I'll give a preview to the audience that I'm not. There's actually more seriousness to that comment. And so one of the things, so even 3 or 4 years ago, 95% of people I would meet and interact with, I would quickly do an assessment, which is quite sad, and I would find them pathetic. They were pathetic to me back then. And I would post some things. I actually had people give me feedback. They asked what changed over the last 3 years, because I've posted some things online that they're pretty trolly, they're pretty antagonistic. I made a post once. I said data scientists are like leeches, consuming tuition from host to host without delivering value, and that just exploded. Pretty offensive to that community. And one of the things I've learned to appreciate is everyone's a genius in their domain. Everyone has lessons and insights and experience that you might not have. And to
Mhm.
try to grade yourself based on income or title or career is quite silly, because I know a lot of people in the tech space where they have tens of millions of dollars in the bank and they have really shitty lives. They are not happy. They have not won at life more than someone else who has less. And so I think appreciating people more has been it's really brought a lot more excitement and appreciation to my life. And maybe an example to give the audience, um, consider you get a coffee in the morning from a barista or someone in your local community. If they're extroverted, if they're engaging with a lot of people, they could say something to you that could change your life. They could say something to you that could be so profound it could derail anyone, a CEO, an executive, a board
Mhm.
member. And I think that's really the superpower that exists in humanity, is our language, our ability to transfer experience. And so, um, and maybe the one of the interesting things I learned, the viral resignation and interview process was actually very difficult.
Yeah,
Some people
can
they think it
imagine.
sounds exciting,
No.
but living on a plane and 90% travel was it was a lot.
Yeah.
And there were some definitely some lessons that came out of that, just understanding our emotions and metabolizing them faster. um, if someone says something that upsets you and makes you angry, I think it's important to allow that emotion to run, but
Mm.
then quickly bring it back to center, because if your emotions run to the edge, then they're now controlling you.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that
You're in
is
that reactive thing rather than
yeah.
pragmatism, right? Yeah. And that's always a lesson in hindsight. Yeah. I learned that a few weeks ago. I was like kicking myself, going, why did I do that? But because we're emotional, right? And I guess that's one trick the robots haven't got yet. Yeah. Is that, that's the beauty of humanity, right? Is our
Yeah.
ability to change. And I think that's a good thing.
It brings up an interesting future topic, because we're talking about technology, the singularity, and these things that could happen. But one of the things that I think will definitely happen in our lifetime would be black market genetic modifying drugs. So CRISPR and other things. I imagine in the next couple of decades, in the black markets, you'll be able to get access to genetic modifiers if you want to be smarter, if you want to live longer, if you want to have these things happen to you, even if they're illegal, you'll be able to get access to them, which is kind of a scary thing to think about. But one of the
Mm.
questions to bring up is, if you could modify human genetics, how would you improve humans? Well, you could remove disease. That's easy. I think most people would agree. There are some diseases that we don't think should exist. But if you wanted to reduce the ego or make humans less competitive, less emotional, or to have more empathy, you might actually extinguish what makes humans great.
Mm. And unique, right? Because
Yeah.
I guess that those are lessons of learning, right? Like you're saying about your journey. And that's the thing about, as you get older and wiser and you have kids as well, they're your benchmarks, right? And how they see you grow and develop, and, how your kid sees you is maybe very different to how you see yourself. And sometimes I'm gutted, my child left me a note probably about a year ago and saying, I really love that you love your job, but you just look really stressed all the time. And I was like cut to the core going, but I think I'm living my best life, but my kid thinks I'm really unhappy and stressed. And I had to really work on that, and that's me being really vulnerable to say that, because it's quite hard, you just you dedicate your life to do something, but your children think that you're just looking stressed, and you're like this swan on the surface. You've got it all going on, right? But without the figure paycheck, I'll just have kind of do it all on a shoestring. But underneath, like, you're paddling like crazy under the surface, just trying to keep it up with it all.
Well, and you bring up a very important point. One of the books I've recently read that's been helpful to me, it's called The Symphony of Selves, or Our Symphony of Selves. And the reason that's been helpful for me is when I read my kids bedtime stories at night, if I'm feeling impatient, if I'm feeling annoyed, if I'm rushing, then I would argue they're dealing with work, Ben. That the archetype that is presenting itself in the moment is the wrong archetype, because work Ben is stressed. Work Ben has a lot of things going on, and he's got to get through this kid stuff quickly. And what I've become better at is, if they're dealing with dad, the fun dad version of me, I'm not stressed. I'm not even thinking about work. I'm lost in the story, tickling, laughing, joking. And I could spend an hour reading books and not think twice about it, or even longer, depending on the night. And one of the lessons that helped me, one of the recommendations I give to parents is, it's important for you to match your child. I would argue at their age and at their gender. So it's very easy to have your phone and look at Slack and text messages and be watching a Disney cartoon and be on the side doing these things where you're checked out. And I think that's quite sad. And I've been there. I've taken my laptop to my daughter's soccer games. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a better parent than I am. But if I can become a 3-year-old girl watching this Princess cartoon and completely get lost in it, your kids will appreciate that. They can tell if you're disconnected, if you're thinking about work, you're not really there. And so for anyone who pretends that they are above watching a cartoon, I think that's quite sad.
I think it's about being present, isn't it?
And you get the benefit of escape. So if you go and meditate, I would compare it to meditation. If you go and meditate, you go exercise, if you completely are lost in the moment watching a movie with your children and not thinking about work, not thinking about school, if you can completely disconnect, there are mental benefits when you come back. You will come back with new perspective. But also sometimes we need a break. You can't just be in the boxing ring every day, all day.
You can't be work bent all the time, right? You can't.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to be that guy, right? All the time. He needs a break.
Well, there's an efficiency lie too, because when I had my startup, I was doing polyphasic sleeping. So you can reduce your core sleep if you work naps into your schedule. And so what I learned is, working a 14, 16-hour day, you might not be as effective as working an 8 or 10-hour day. And so there's a lie there that we tell ourselves, that if we could just work more, we'll get more done.
We'll achieve more. But I think that's not the case. I think we've just got a couple of more questions, Ben. From Chisholm, I know with experience, data scientists usually know the models that suit the data sets, but at the beginning of your career journey, how did you navigate through knowing the models to use to solve a particular problem, and how you go about sourcing the required data sets in the real world? That's a good question, Chisholm.
So early on with me, I had to know the models. And so I'd get access. I learned things through networking with other data scientists, people that I looked up to in the field. They would expose me to more models that I wasn't familiar with. Online, I would follow different people that I looked up to as well. That was a good way to get exposure. And then in the real world, there's personal data sets, projects, and startups, and then there's access to business data. So business data, sometimes you have to work with IT, you have to work with different business units. And sometimes that can be quite difficult to get access to the data. Sometimes you can't get access without a business case. And then on personal, I've had examples where you have to get creative with web scraping, collecting other things. And so I encourage, with the passion projects, find reasons to collect your own data sets, find reasons to build your own data sets, because there's value in that exercise.
Okay, fantastic. And then just one more, and just saying, if there were any other kind of tips about the job interview, you can tell that my students are kind of preparing for next year. They do their data science project in February, and then that goes to the end of April. Then they'll be kind of ready for the market. So I know they're already stressing, and we're obviously going or in a recession. So they're probably already thinking like, if there are any other little tips, and then we'll let you go then.
Yeah, it kind of depends on how aggressive they want to play the interview game. I think sometimes as students we're hoping to get a job, and so we can be a little timid. But if we want to be really aggressive, one of the things I've talked about is this concept of reckless commitment. And so reckless commitment would be someone on this call is going to decide that they will give a talk at a local meetup on the latest and greatest thing in AI. So pick some topic that is intimidating or overwhelming. And if you can convince the organizer where you're going to come and give a talk on to a meetup, I've seen people get jobs from that. And the interesting thing with that is that puts you in a public interview. So if you are
Wow.
giving a presentation to 50, 100 data scientists in your community, that can be a very intimidating thing, because what if I look stupid? What if someone in the
Mhm.
audience knows more about this topic than I do? And yes, that is a possibility, but if you prepare for that presentation, that can be a really good way for you to get attention. It kind of reminds me of dating as well.
Okay.
Because if you're desperate for a partner, if you're desperate for a job that comes through, if you are if you're looking, if you're trying to find the right fit, if they're aware that you have other offers that you're considering, then they lean into you. Um,
But you
Passion
didn't
is
sleep it. You didn't sleep in the woods to get the job, did you? Like that
no.
that was through necessity, right? I think I might maybe
Oh
there was some
yeah,
sound barrier. That was necessity,
yeah. It was a shortcut because
a shortcut.
I was paying for college.
Okay, so you slept in the woods. God, that's
Yeah.
going to be my next post. I can't believe that. I used to live in the Czech Republic, and it was -19. So
Oh yeah.
I know how cold that is. So I can't believe that you slept outside.
But
Wow.
I think Lucy, the core of that answer to that question, I would say it's entangled in storytelling.
Yeah.
Because if you are really good at storytelling, if you can set the right first impression, if you can be perceived as being someone who's very smart, very driven, without crossing the line of arrogance, that is really powerful. And so the it is quite silly to think that whether or not you get a job, it is based on the projects you do and the technical competency. You can't fail key technical competency questions in
Mhm.
the interview, but ultimately you getting a job will be the words that you write and the words that you say. But
Yes.
we don't talk about storytelling. We don't really think about it. And so one of the greatest catalysts or superpowers that you have access to is it's kind of forgotten. It's not really prioritized until it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the students at the moment, they're applying for all the projects that we've given them. So they're also quite stressed because they've got deadlines, and they're having to juggle all these things. And we've also said, bring your whole self to the application process. And next year we are thinking about giving them the possibility they can record themselves. And I was a bit inspired by your YouTube one, because I thought how great it would be if people want to do that. They can record their interview and their application process, because I think that might be interesting for some of our clients as well. So, okay, well, I think we've kind of run out of time now, and amazing, Ben. Thank you so much. I'm really honoured to have you here and to be with the students. So, thank you so much. And yeah, we'll just say good evening from here. And are you in the morning? Yeah, you're afternoon now, right?
Yeah, it's
Lunchtime.
1 p.m. I'm
Okay.
actually flying to Belgrade this Saturday, so I will be over on that side of the pond
Okay.
for a talk. But I was going to tell your students that Ben Taylor Data. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. Um, I want to be helpful, so if there's a question that someone had that wasn't answered, or if they think about a question later, please reach out. But also know sometimes I get overwhelmed by the number of messages, so just be persistent, and
Yeah.
in Lucy can always
Yeah,
raise the flag on
absolutely. You can
something.
always, yeah, you can always
If
send
I'm
me
not being
stuff.
responsive, yeah, if I'm not
Yeah.
being responsive, then
Yeah,
have
you can
Lucy.
send them to me and then I
Yeah.
can dovetail them to Ben. So thank you so much. We really wish you a great day. Thank you so much. And yeah, good luck.
Okay. Thank you.
Excited. All right,
Thanks,
take
everybody.
care. Bye. Bye-bye.